My name is Pascal Welsch, and I'm a Flutter Google developer expert. I work as a freelancer, but Google gives me the opportunity to go to conferences and give talks about my personal passion, which is Flutter. Who here has tried Flutter? Give me a hand sign. Okay, and leave your hand up if you like Flutter. And if you, oh yeah, basically everyone who tried it also loved it. It's basically like my my impression. So Flutter is this cool mobile SDK which allows you to build mobile applications, not only mobile applications, applications for all kind of platforms, including web, which was launched recently. It's in technical preview, but also desktop, which means Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. It's also a technical preview, but it works. And there are applications out there which were built with Flutter, which work on desktop. Flutter makes it very easy to get fast, and you have a great development speed if you're using Flutter. You have things like hot reload, which means you change the code in your editor and you see it live on the device. It's amazing how fast you can build UIs just by changing your code. It's similar to web development, but coming to mobile, in mobile, it usually takes like 1 minute, 30 seconds to 1 minute to see your changes on the screen if you're going native. With Flutter, it's like a sub-second change, and you will see your code. This sub-second hot reloading doesn't come with any impact on performance. In fact, Dart has two compilers. There's one compiler which is the JIT compiler. It executes the code as it sees, and it's pretty fast. And then there's this other compiler which is used for production, which is an ahead-of-time compiler, and it compiles your Dart code directly to machine code, to ARM machine code. That's why it's very, very fast at runtime, similar fast or even faster than native applications, which ship Java code or Objective-C code, Swift code, whatever. As I told, Flutter is multi-platform. This means it runs on mobile, Android, and iOS, and that's what they started. That's where they are really good at this. Then there's also web. It's a technical preview, cool. You can write desktop applications, fine. But when I saw that slide, I really asked myself, what is embedded? And I haven't found anything except for this. That's the Google Home, or now it's called Nest Home Hub. And this is running a Linux, and on top of it, a pure Flutter application. And for me, this is really impressive, because this is a 100% Google product. They could have chosen any framework. They could have chosen web, they could have used Android, but they explicitly chose Flutter because it's such a great framework to write fancy UI applications and write fancy animations. And this is all about animations and all about video content. So don't fear if you are writing a video app with Flutter. It works, and Google is doing it as well. I earn money as a freelancer and as a coach. I go inside of companies and help teams to get better at Flutter development. I give workshops, public workshops, or in-house workshops. That's how I connect to many developers, to many companies and their CTOs, to many startups. And that's how I gained all my knowledge about Flutter and the ecosystem around all the Flutter developers. And this question, is it just me or is Flutter really great? It popped up all the time. Whenever I go to a new client, they ask me, yeah, Flutter is cool, you tell us all those cool things, but is it really that good or is it just you? And I couldn't answer that question. That's why I came up with this talk. And I gathered all the information I have from all the teams I work with, all the developers, all the people I meet at meetups, and collected all this information to decide if it's just me who thinks Flutter is awesome, or is Flutter maybe really great and there's nobody who thinks, no, Flutter's not that great. So I created a survey not a real survey. I contacted every developer or CTO directly. I did a lot of phone interviews with them and asked them general questions, and they talked about their product, their company, and all the colleagues they are working with. So this is just an information where all my data is from. Yeah, basically these are the groups of people. There are some indie developers, freelancers like me, and also some agencies and some companies who currently bet fully on Flutter. Yeah, definitely. Maybe it's a bit simplified or my sampling is not right. This is not a research thing. I just did it on my own to get my data. I did no research, and maybe I only talked to white developers. I don't know. So don't take this too serious. It was just my way to get more information. Let's start with onboarding. What is it like to start as a developer with Flutter if you have no experience with Flutter? And I'd like to separate developers in different groups, depending on their background. We have web developers, we have mobile developers which develop natively, and we have other kinds of developers. So let's start with the first one. There's a React Native developer and a web developer. And as a React Native developer, it's very similar. Flutter is not much different. The only thing that always comes up when a React Native developer moves to Flutter is there's no dependency hell. Actually, a normal Flutter app has 4 times less dependencies than React Native, and also 4 times less breaking dependencies. And this is really a problem if you're working with React Native. There are all the time breaking changes, and it's really hard to manage your dependencies. As a web developer, it just works. It's like React. Basically, Flutter is like React, slightly different, and it's a different language. But also Kotlin is very much, Dart is very much like any TypeScript. And you get used to it in a day, maybe a week. It's pretty fast. It looks a bit different if we are looking to native developers, native Android and iOS developers. Especially the Android developers are a bit upset, and they don't see the beauty of Flutter because they are used to libraries like Retrofit. They want their cool language, which is Kotlin, and they don't get that. They get other things, but they don't see it. They initially only see the bad parts. iOS developers, there are only a few. I don't know why, but maybe the pain on the iOS side is not that big as on the Android side, but there are not that much iOS developers there. The only thing I noticed is that iOS developers usually work with callbacks all the time. Here a callback, here a callback. It's like callback hell, and they are used to it, and they never heard of something like a promise or a future. Streams and RX are just new to them, and you really have to keep that in mind. So basically, everything I've just said, React or Vue is very similar to Flutter. If you're used to one of those, migrating to another is very easy. For mobile developers, native mobile developers, they have a problem because declarative UI, that's how you describe your UI in code, is new to them. They are used to the imperative style. Now with Swift UI and Jetpack Compose, yes, they get the same thing, but it's very new. You have to see mobile development and web development drifted apart like 10 years. And now finally, we are now going to merge those and merge the communities and find the best way. And mobile developers, native mobile developers, worked for 10 years with their same stuff, where all the development, new frameworks happened on the website. So it's very hard for them to migrate over. One of the CTOs I was talking to, or was it I don't know, some C-level manager I talked to, said within 1 week, a web developer was able to actually deliver features and ship features. And this just shows how small the hurdle is to get started with Flutter. One question I usually get from beginners in Flutter is, yeah, I just built this cool screen or this cool widget here, but now can you show me how you can build this professionally, or how would you do this? And I'm always like, yeah, you just built it perfectly. It couldn't be better. The framework guides you how to build it exactly right. And that's one thing you don't see in other platforms, especially mobile development with natives. You have to work 1 year, 2 years with that thing until you know how to build stuff properly. With Flutter, every junior, after a few days, weeks, is able to build the same kind of code as a professional Flutter developer would do. You can check out the material library, the Flutter material library, and check out all the components there, and you will see you can read the code, it's easy to understand, and you would probably write the same code. Especially when talking to companies, agencies, one problem which came up with mobile or native development is staffing. Staffing is really hard. And I want to show you how a usual mobile team looks like. This is how a mobile team looks like if you run natively. You need at least 2 developers per platform. So we have 2 iOS and 2 Android developers. You need 1 designer per platform because usually designers are either iOS specific or Android specific. And you have your product manager and your Scrum masters. We all do Scrum. So to just get started with a mobile app, you need 8 people. And that's pretty hard for a startup. So if you're a startup and you're going to some agency, hey, can you build me this app? Yeah, we need to have iOS and Android. Can you build me this? Paying 8 people full-time for a period of time, it's pretty hard and costs a lot of money. This is something which came up. It's from Nubank, and this article was published last week. It says, another bottleneck we found when relying on specialized native development platforms on every new feature or product launch was the staffing nightmare. Even with our increased hiring efforts, there were never enough developers to fully staff our product teams. And that's something I experienced as well. Before I became a freelancer, I worked at an agency and I was also responsible for the hiring process. And hiring mobile teams is very hard. Maybe you find a few iOS developers, but you will not find the same amount of Android developers at the same time. It's really complicated. Also, hiring developers is quite important. There was this article about what it's the price of the hiring process per developer. Those are US numbers, and 50K is pretty much, but when you read the article, you will see, yes, it makes sense that it's that much. Compared to Europe, I would say 15 to 20,000 is a more realistic number in euros. So it's pretty expensive. And how is this different in a Flutter team? That's the question. So a minimal Flutter team looks something like this. You also need 2 developers, 2 Flutter developers, because they have to review each other. Then you need a designer. Usually Flutter teams go with 1 designer because Flutter embraces the concept of a brand-first UI. A brand-first UI is just a UI which looks similar on all platforms. One example is Netflix or Spotify. They basically look the same on iOS and Android. It's their brand and their identity. So you don't need a lot of other UX designers for different platforms. You will need help from native developers. Basically, you're shipping to native platforms. Maybe you need some help to set up the pipelines, or there's one plugin which is missing some feature on iOS or on Android. You need help from native developers. But the chances are good that those 2 Flutter developers maybe have a background in some native development and can solve the task. Or you can just hire a freelancer for a week or 2 to solve that problem. You don't have to hire those people permanently. From the Scrum side, nothing changes. There's one new guy in your team, which is a big pile of money, because you will save so much money by not having to employ that many developers, but still being able to deliver the same product. For startups, that's very important. Smaller teams have another big opportunity because they don't waste that much time on communication. The more developers you add, the bigger gets the communication overhead. And here's a curve how this reflects in real world. On the bottom, you see the number of developers. And those curves are basically the performance of those teams. The more developers you add, the more performance you get. But at some point, the communication overhead wins, and adding more developers doesn't make the team more performant. So how does it look like for our Flutter and native teams? Our Flutter teams are here. And the blue curves represents what I usually see in companies. It's that there is a communication overhead of about 10%. And a Flutter team basically peaks at that. A minimal team, I've showed you before, peaks at that team size and has the maximum performance. A native team basically goes over the peak and becomes less performant because there are too many people involved. One benefit of Flutter apps is that they have a single code base. And a single code base means that you can share all your knowledge in that code base, and everyone is working with the same code. We never want this to happen. If you're used to the term bus factor, it's basically the number of developers who can be hit by a bus and your project is not risked or is not stopped. So development can just continue. You want to have a bus factor of at least 2 or 3. But getting there is pretty hard if you have 2 separate teams, like with native development. So on the one side, you see native developers, and here's the Flutter team. Right now, you have bus factor of 1 for the native side and bus factor of 2 on the Flutter side. To get a bus factor of 3, you basically have to add 4 new developers on the native side. Because you have a single code base on the Flutter side, it's easier to stack up your developers and to increase the bus factor. So you have a lot less risk of your project because people are leaving or people get hurt somehow. Usually people leave. Another CTO I was talking to said that staffing has become very easy with Flutter. Basically the easiest thing ever, because you can basically use every developer, no matter the background. Every developer is able to get running with Flutter if they are motivated to in a couple of weeks, and there's no big entry hurdle. I'm talking to a lot of companies, and if they are starting with a new product, they want to start with Flutter, I'm looking at the team who is building the product. And compared to the teams I've seen with native developers, they are a lot more diverse. Not more diverse because they have different skin color, but more diverse because the people working on Flutter projects usually have different backgrounds. And that's a good thing. So if you look at native teams, you will see like that, something like that. It's not a good mix. Everyone has to be a senior, otherwise you are not a good mobile native developer. Everyone is a senior, principal, magician, I don't know. Looking at the Flutter teams and the teams I've seen and I've worked with are very different. People have different backgrounds. People maybe started way, way later coding, and they have pretty interesting stories to tell. And yes, development might be better if you just have seniors, but if you think about the product you're building, the product is not only used by 30-year-old people living in San Francisco. The product is used by all kind of people. And if all kind of people building those products, it's only better for the product. You will see also competing concepts if you combine a group of people with very diverse backgrounds. Because when they have different backgrounds, they might have different design patterns in mind when they try to solve a problem. That's a good thing, because now the team can decide whether one solution is good or one is bad, where are the benefit of the other one compared to this one. And it ends up with the best solution, hopefully. The biggest thing here is that not only the solution is the best one, but also everyone learns from each other. By comparing different architecture styles, by comparing different libraries, you will learn something new. And if you have worked with a group where the background is very different, you will learn so much new things. And in the last 1 or 2 years, I learned so much about web development, which is not my background. I'm coming from Android, but I learned so much about web development, and I'm very thankful for that experience. Who here has ever said no to their designers? I did, for a reason. Not because the design was bullshit, but the design was very, very hard to implement. With Flutter, you are able to implement basically any design you want. You are in charge of drawing every pixel on the screen. And if you have a brand first design, then you can share those same draw pixels across all platforms. Maybe you have to do some adjustments on some platforms, but usually it's okay to have the same pixels drawn on the same platform with the same code. Then you don't have to say no to your designer, because Flutter gives you all the toolings to build those great UIs. This Android guy is basically me 2 or 3 years ago. When a designer came to me, showed me a cool concept of a design, and I was like, yeah, let me first check out that animation looks a bit hard. Let me research how those animations can be implemented. And I was searching for a library to do this, haven't found one, and I said, yeah, I can do this, but it's very hard. It will take me at least 2 or 3 weeks. It's pretty expensive. Maybe go with another variant. Or maybe let's use this library. It's not perfect, but it looks very similar. And this is basically how we ended up with all Android apps look the same. There is not much difference in Android apps because we are all using the same libraries. Nobody really wants to build something new. And this is a problem. With Flutter, this looks different. Also me, a few weeks ago, I was talking to another Flutter developer with an Android background, and he asked me, why are you not using the official Flutter progress bar widget? I was building a video player and displayed a progress bar, and I did not even thought about using a library. I did no research because it's just a thin line, and I can draw it myself. There's nothing complex about it. So I wrote it myself. It took me literally 15 minutes. And yeah, he was right. There is an official progress bar, but I was not using it. And then we compared the source code, and we ended up with basically the identical source code. And that's one learning something I learned over the time. Building something myself is not better. It's not worse than the official ones, but it gives me the opportunity to change things slightly the way I want it in my product. And I cannot do this easily if I'm using a library. I have to fork it, I have to communicate with the owners of the library, add a pull request, things like that. By just writing it myself, part of my code base, changes are easy and everyone is willing to do those changes. It's better for the product in the end. And building something unique, something you've never seen before, has become easy because Flutter gives me all these tools to actually build those cool products. One example is Reflectly. They just won the Material Design Award 2019. And Reflectly is basically a diary of your mood, and you can add your experiences of the day every day, and over the time you get some graphs. The UI is super custom, but it feels like a Material app. That's why they won this prize for the best customized Material app. And something like this has never been done in the last 5 years where Material Design was announced. This has only been done now that we have the tools with Flutter to customize Material Design the way we want. I talked a bit about designers, but I want to point out a few more things when working with designers. I was working in another team where they migrated over to from native to Flutter. And the native developers still had to do some work on the old product because the products are live and there are active users and there are bugs. So they don't have enough time to actually work on the Flutter code. But there was this one designer who said, I have nothing to do, the old app is done, they are only bug fixing, I have nothing to do, I will focus on Flutter. And he started prototyping the new UI with Flutter. He never coded before, but after I came to the company 1 month later after they started for my second workshop, this guy was the best. All others were good. They have started with working with Flutter, but this guy rocked. Really, he built the best user interfaces in basically no time, and he was the guy everyone was running to if they had a problem, because he was so much into it. It gives Flutter gives you a great productivity boost, but it's even better if the designer is working directly with the code base. And it's actually simple. If you are used to Chrome web tools, where you can just right-click on something, on some image on a website, and then you can see exactly where in the DOM that thing is located. The same thing works with Flutter, and you can use the Flutter inspector, start it, and then tap on some widget on the screen, and it shows you a tree of widgets where that thing is located, and even better, it jumps you directly into code where that widget was designed or where that widget came from. And the code, Flutter is a declarative UI framework, and declarative UI has this big benefit of easy to understand code. The same thing you write here in code is basically displayed on the screen. So it's actually easy for designers to change things. You could imagine here this image asset, just changing the size of the image. It's trivial. It can be done by any developers. And if you're used to work with developers and they give you some style sheet for some component in the web, you can do that with Flutter as well. Developers can actually create themes for you, and designers can actually customize the widget on the screen however they like. Designers can be part of your development team, and give them the opportunity if you can. They are willing to do it, and it's not hard. They use things like Framer, where they write complex code for animations. They can build a declarative styled user interface with Flutter. I quickly want to talk about multi-platform. It's a big win. And the coolest thing is it comes for free, because you're building the same thing and you're shipping it to all the platforms. Things like that should never happen. That you basically say, hey, users, we have a new feature, try it out. Oh, you're on Android. Sorry, it's iOS only. You shouldn't do that. Your users want to have the latest features on all platforms. They don't understand that there are different teams and that some feature is more complex on Android than on iOS. Users just want to have that feature. With Flutter and a single code base, you basically build it once and ship it to all the platforms. And you also ship it at the same time. The only thing that might be a problem is if you have a review at Apple, but yeah, it's just a few days currently. It's very important for startups to ship or to write once and ship twice. When I talked to startup, they were discussing a new product or their product, that's why they're a startup. And they were like, oh, usually our clients use iOS, but we are here in the German market, and the German market has like 80 to 90% Android users. Maybe you should start with Android, but it's hard. Android UI, it always takes longer. It's a risk for startups to bet on one platform, but maybe they only have the money to support one and get the MVP out. With Flutter, you write it once and all the users are happy. designers often create designs for one platform, but having just one design also works. I was working in one startup, they pretty much focused on iOS first, and we basically shipped the same app to Android. Android users weren't happy because it did not feel like a material app, it was different. With a few adjustments, we could fix it, so it was feeling more like Android. But overall, the people were happy that they are able to use the app at all. And having a feature which does not look that good on one platform is better than not having that feature at all. After working with many developers from different backgrounds, I noticed that they are pretty surprised what they learned. I just want to give you here an example what I mean. For example, an Ionic. I never mentioned Ionic here, it's another cross-platform tool using web technologies. Ionic developer said after using Flutter, oh, cool. And I saw that thing called Code Magic, and it basically, you give it your code repository to Code Magic, they are building it, they are testing it, and then they are shipping it to the App Store and to the Play Store simultaneously. That's pretty cool, and he did not know something like that existed. So learning something new from native developers, sophisticating your tool chain, that comes often. iOS developers are used to write UI tests, but they are never executing it, because executing UI tests on iOS takes a lot of time. You have to have a simulator or a real device, and then execute them, and you can really watch them, what they are doing. And they take like 10 times longer than on any other platform, because you can see in real time what's happening. Every click takes a second. They are never using it, and when an iOS developer discovered that with Flutter you can run your UI tests headless, without a simulator, just on the command line, they were pretty amazed. And now they are running UI tests for every pull request. I want to end this talk with a quick summary why I think Flutter is better for teams, and therefore when teams are better, the product becomes better. First thing, I talked about smaller teams. If you have less communication overhead, you have more time working on the product, you have more productivity. Flutter ends the nightmare with staffing we have with native development. And we never have this missing developer. Every developer can be a Flutter developer. It's not hard, it's actually easy. We have diverse teams, and they create friction. And by this friction usually creates better solutions, and better solutions are better for your product. And the onboarding, you don't lose any time onboarding developers. You will lose some time, but not that much as with other platforms. And in the end, Flutter development is super, super fast. If you're coming from web development, it won't surprise you, because you also have things like hot reload with React applications or Vue applications. But shipping mobile applications is a lot faster with Flutter than with any other tool. My final question, if you would build a startup and you require an application, would you go with Flutter or would you go native? Thank you.